The crystal chandeliers of the penthouse didn't just reflect light, they reflected unchecked power. When a clumsy waitress spilled a drop of vintage champagne, the room's elite erupted in cruel laughter. They thought she was nobody. They didn't know she was 3 keystrokes away from turning their billions into zero. The air inside the $80 million penthouse overlooking Central Park South was thick with the scent of white truffles and Tom Ford cologne. It was the annual private gala for the partners and primary investors of Croft Capital, an exclusive gathering where Manhattan's most ruthless financial predators came to celebrate their victories. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was a grid of glittering lights, a world of ordinary people struggling to pay rent. Inside, however, the concept of money was abstract. It was a scoreboard, and the people in this room were winning by billions. Navigating through the sea of custom Tom Ford suits and glittering Cartier diamonds was Chloe, dressed in the stark black and white uniform of Lumiere event staffing. She held a silver tray balanced perfectly on her fingertips, carrying flutes of Dom Perignon Vintage 2012. Her hair was pulled back into a severe anonymous bun, her makeup minimal. To the titans of industry occupying the room, she was completely invisible. She was less a human being and more a piece of moving furniture, a convenient mechanism for delivering alcohol. No, I'm telling you, the SEC is completely blind to it, boasted Nathaniel Croft, the billionaire host and CEO of Croft Capital. He stood by the grand piano, aggressively swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. He was a man who wore his wealth like a weapon. We route the secondary assets through the Cayman Monetary Authority, wash it through the new shell entities in Luxembourg, and it completely bypasses the standard SWIFT network. It's untouchable. Chloe paused just a fraction of a second as she offered a flute to Simon Roth, a notorious hedge fund manager who had just shorted a pharmaceutical company into bankruptcy, costing 10,000 people their jobs. Simon didn't even look at Chloe as he took the glass. It's brilliant, Nathaniel. But what about the encryption? I heard FinCEN is cracking down on offshore ledgers. We have over 4 billion collectively sitting in the Aegis Gateway. If that firewall drops, we are all facing federal indictments. Aegis is impenetrable, scoffed Victoria Blair, a tech heiress and venture capitalist draped in a white silk gown that cost more than a Midwestern home. She lazily snapped her fingers in Chloe's direction, pointing at an empty caviar blinny on the table, indicating without words that Chloe should clear it. We acquired the root architecture from that naive little startup 2 years ago. We ousted the founder, took the code, and locked it behind biometric, multi-signature keys. It requires the live voice authorization of 3 board members just to unlock the master terminal. Nobody is getting in. Chloe calmly picked up the discarded plate. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. She kept her eyes lowered, displaying the perfect subservience expected of a hired hand making $15 an hour. But Chloe was not making $15 an hour, and her name, at least on the corporate registries of the very startup Victoria had just casually mentioned, was Chloe Jenkins, the brilliant, fiercely private founder of Aegis Security Solutions. 2 years ago, Nathaniel, Simon, and Victoria had executed a hostile, fraudulent takeover of Chloe's company. They had manipulated venture capital laws, buried her in malicious litigation, and stolen her proprietary blockchain encryption software. They thought they had ruined a young, helpless coder. They didn't realize they had simply forced an apex predator into the shadows. They used her system to hide their illegal market manipulations, believing the biometric locks they installed made them gods. What they didn't know was that Chloe had embedded a sleeper protocol deep within the kernel of the Aegis code before she was ousted, a backdoor so complex it was entirely invisible to their highly paid cybersecurity teams. But to activate it, she needed one final key: the live, uncompressed voice prints of Nathaniel, Simon, and Victoria, recorded simultaneously in the same acoustic environment. Underneath her stiff white collar, hidden by the fabric, a microscopic directional microphone was pinned to her bra strap. Every arrogant boast, every confession of federal fraud, and every unique vocal inflection was currently being captured, digitized, and fed into a secure cloud server, waiting for the final override command. Chloe moved silently to the next group, allowing the billionaires to continue their self-congratulatory speech. She endured the sharp, dismissive glances. She endured Victoria complaining loudly that the waitstaff looked haggard and lowered the aesthetic of the room. "Honestly, Nathaniel," Victoria drawled, her voice carrying across the marble floors, "where do you find these people? She looks like she just crawled out of a subway grate." A chorus of polite, cruel chuckles followed. Chloe kept her face entirely blank, stepping back into the shadows of the hallway to refill her tray. Let them laugh, she thought, adjusting the cheap digital watch on her wrist. The watch was actually a specialized terminal relay. A tiny green light blinked once. The audio file was compiling. She just needed a few more sentences from them to complete the biometric puzzle. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her apron. The game was almost over. She stepped back into the lion's den. The evening progressed into a formal sit-down dinner. The massive mahogany dining table, stretching 20 feet across the room, was adorned with elaborate floral centerpieces and lit by towering candelabras. The guests took their seats, their laughter growing louder and more raucous as the expensive wine flowed. Chloe and 3 other servers were tasked with pouring the crown jewel of Nathaniel's cellar, a 1945 Romane Conti. It was a wine so rare and absurdly expensive that dropping a bottle would be the financial equivalent of totaling a luxury sports car. Chloe stood behind Simon Roth, waiting for the precise moment to pour. Simon was holding court, aggressively waving his fork in the air as he made a point about the weakness of the working class. "They simply lack the genetic drive," Simon declared, taking a bite of his Wagyu beef. "People complain about the wealth gap, but look at the service industry. They have no ambition. They are content to carry our plates and wipe our tables because they don't have the intellect to conquer the market." He gestured broadly, and to emphasize his point, he threw his arm backward without looking. His elbow slammed hard into Chloe's forearm, just as she tipped the heavy glass bottle of Romane Conti. It happened in slow motion. The dark, crimson liquid splashed violently out of the bottle, missing Simon's glass entirely. Instead, a heavy arc of deep red wine flew across the table and landed squarely on the bodice of Victoria Blair's pristine, white silk gown. The silence that instantly fell over the room was deafening. The gentle clinking of silverware stopped. The quiet jazz playing from the hidden speakers suddenly felt uncomfortably loud. Victoria looked down at her chest. A jagged, dark stain was rapidly blooming across the expensive silk, looking like a fresh wound. For a second, She was frozen in sheer disbelief. Then, her face contorted into a mask of absolute, unhinged fury. "You stupid, clumsy wretch!" Victoria shrieked, jumping up from her chair so fast it tipped over backwards and crashed against the floor. Chloe immediately stepped back, lowering the bottle. "I apologize, Mom." Mr. Roth moved his arm unexpectedly. "And do not dare blame him," Nathaniel roared, slamming his fists onto the table as he stood up. His face was purple with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? Do you know who we are? That dress costs more than your entire family will make in a decade. It's ruined," Victoria screamed, grabbing a linen napkin and frantically dabbing at the stain, which only made it smear worse. "Nathaniel, I want her fired. I want her arrested for destruction of property. I want her completely destroyed." The other guests watched with a mixture of shock and twisted amusement. This was better entertainment than the string quartet. A commoner was being publicly executed in their social arena. "Get the manager of the catering company on the phone right now," Simon sneered, wiping a stray drop of wine off his own cuff. He looked at Chloe with utter disgust. "You people are all the same, incompetent and worthless." Nathaniel stepped around the table, invading Chloe's personal space. He loomed over her, his eyes blazing with a terrifying, unchecked arrogance. He was a man used to breaking people, and he fully intended to break the waitress standing in front of him. "You're going to get down on your knees right now," Nathaniel said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet hiss that carried perfectly through the silent room. "You are going to get on your knees, and you are going to scrub the floor where that wine dripped. And then you are going to beg Victoria for forgiveness. If you do not, I promise you, I will make sure you never work in this city again. I will bury you in legal debt until you are sleeping on the street." The cruelty in the room was palpable. It was a heavy, suffocating weight. Any normal person would have crumbled. The other servers in the room looked away, terrified, glad they weren't the ones in the crosshairs. Chloe looked at Nathaniel. She looked at Victoria, who was trembling with rage, and then at Simon, who was smiling a vicious, satisfied smile. "You are going to get down on your knees. I want her completely destroyed. You people are all the same." Beneath her apron, the cheap digital watch vibrated. 3 short pulses. The directional microphone had caught it all. The elevated stress in their voices, the specific cadences of their shouting. The biometric system required extreme emotional resonance to ensure it wasn't a synthesized deepfake. Their sheer, unadulterated anger had provided the perfect, unfalsifiable voice prints. The biometric puzzle was complete. The master override was unlocked. Slowly, the terrified, submissive posture Chloe had held all night completely evaporated. The slump in her shoulders vanished. She stood up straighter, her presence suddenly expanding, filling the space in a way that visibly unsettled Nathaniel. Instead of apologizing, instead of crying, the corners of Chloe's mouth twitched upward into a cold, terrifyingly calm smile. "No," Chloe said. Her voice was no longer the soft, subservient whisper of a waitress. It was sharp, authoritative, and laced with absolute control. Nathaniel blinked, genuinely taken aback. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" Chloe didn't answer him immediately. She calmly reached a hand up to the back of her head, pulled out the hairpin holding her severe bun, and let her dark hair fall freely around her shoulders. Then She reached around her waist and deliberately untied her black catering apron, letting it drop to the expensive marble floor with a soft thud. I said, "No, Nathaniel," Chloe replied, stepping away from the spilled wine and pulling a sleek, customized titanium smartphone from her pocket. "I won't be wiping up anything, but you're going to want to sit down. All of you. Because you are about to have a very, very expensive night." The penthouse fell into an eerie, suffocating silence. The transition was so abrupt, so entirely outside the realm of the billionaire's comprehension, that for a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved. The string quartet in the corner had stopped playing entirely, the cellist's bow hovering an inch above the strings. Nathaniel Croft stared at the discarded apron on the floor, then up at the woman who had just shed her subservience like a cheap coat. The psychological dissonance was jarring. A waitress did not speak to him like that. A waitress did not possess a custom-milled, military-grade titanium smartphone that looked more like a DARPA prototype than a commercial device. "Security!" Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking as the initial shock wore off, replaced by an ugly, aristocratic panic. "Get her out of here! Have her arrested!" Two burly men in discreet black suits, who had been lingering near the private elevator banks, began to step forward. "I wouldn't," Chloe said, her voice slicing through the room with absolute authority. She didn't even look at the guards. Her eyes were locked onto the screen of her device. Her thumbs flew across the digital keyboard with terrifying speed. "Unless you want your personal, unlisted accounts at UBS and Barclays frozen along with your bosses, I suggest you stay exactly where you are." The guards hesitated, glancing at Nathaniel for confirmation. That hesitation was all Chloe needed. "What is this nonsense?" Simon Roth scoffed, though the color had noticeably drained from his face. He adjusted his silk tie nervously. "You're a delusional cater waiter. You don't have access to anything." "Don't I, Simon?" Chloe murmured, her eyes reflecting the cold blue light of her screen. "Let's see. You're currently routing your short sale profits through a BlackRock subsidiary shell company, account number ending in 884 Bravo. You bypassed the SEC compliance protocols using the Aegis Gateway's backdoor ledger." Simon's jaw dropped. The smug, vicious sneer vanished instantly. That account number wasn't just classified. It was buried under layers of offshore corporate structuring, so deep that even his own accounting firm didn't have the full picture. "Who are you?" Nathaniel demanded, his voice suddenly stripped of its arrogant roar. A creeping, icy dread began to pool in his stomach. He recognized the sleek interface reflecting in her eyes. It was the proprietary aesthetic of the system his empire relied on. Chloe finally looked up. She tapped one final icon on her screen, a localized Bluetooth mirroring protocol. Behind Nathaniel, the massive 100-inch OLED smart television that had been displaying a silent feed of Bloomberg News suddenly flickered and went black. A second later, the screen ignited with a blazing white logo, a shield encompassed by a digital biometric wave, the Aegis Security Solutions logo. A collective gasp echoed through the room. Several of the minor investors backed away, their survival instincts kicking in. They didn't understand the technicalities, but they understood the sudden scent of blood in the water. "My name is Chloe Jenkins," she announced, her voice echoing off the floor-to-ceiling glass. Victoria Blair physically stumbled backward, her ruined silk dress tangling around her ankles. "Jenkins, no, she's a ghost. She was bought out. We exiled her." "You didn't buy me out, Victoria," Chloe corrected, her tone laced with venom. "You weaponized venture capital litigation, framed me for corporate negligence, and locked me out of the very encryption framework I built from scratch in a cramped studio apartment in Queens. You stole Aegis, and then, like the absolute parasites you are, you used my creation to launder billions of dollars of illegally acquired assets. Shut it down," Nathaniel bellowed, wildly gesturing to the television. He turned to the crowd of stunned, silent billionaires. "Don't listen to her. It's a bluff. She doesn't have the master key. The biometric lock requires 3 distinct vocal prints." "I know," Chloe smiled. It was a terrifying smile. "That's why I've been serving you champagne all night, Nathaniel. You people really love the sound of your own voices, especially when you're bragging about federal crimes." On the massive OLED screen, a highly complex audio waveform appeared. It was split into 3 distinct, color-coded channels. A digitized voice, cool and synthetic, echoed from the penthouse's hidden surround sound speakers. "Biometric verification complete. Vocal prints confirmed. Croft, Nathaniel. Blair, Victoria. Roth, Simon. Stress patterns align. Artificial synthesis ruled out. Decrypting master ledger." The screen exploded into a cascading waterfall of data. Thousands of rows of routing numbers, offshore banking codes, and hidden equity transfers scrolled past at light speed. It was the financial equivalent of pulling back the curtain on the Wizard of Oz, exposing every illicit trade, every tax evasion scheme, and every stolen pension fund Croft Capital had orchestrated over the last 24 months. "Oh my God," whispered an older gentleman near the piano, realizing his own funds were tied up in the network being displayed. "She has everything." "You're a dead woman, Jenkins," Simon spat, his hands shaking violently as he pulled out his own phone. "I have the best lawyers in Manhattan. I have judges on retainer. You're going to spend the rest of your life in federal prison for cyber terrorism." "That's the beauty of it, Simon," Chloe replied, never breaking eye contact. "I'm not hacking you. I'm simply logging in with my administrative credentials. Credentials you were too incompetent to fully scrub from the root architecture. And I'm not stealing your money. I wouldn't touch your filthy capital with a 10-foot pole." Chloe tapped the screen of her phone again. "Initiating directive. Icarus," the automated voice announced. On the massive screen, the status of every single account shifted simultaneously. The green text indicating active flickered, turning a harsh, flashing crimson. Account frozen. Account frozen. Account frozen. "What are you doing?" Nathaniel screamed, lunging across the spilled Romane Conti. His custom leather shoes slipped on the expensive wine, sending him crashing to his knees. He didn't care. He scrambled up, leaning against the mahogany table. "Stop this right now. You're destroying the market." "I'm correcting it," Chloe said coldly. "Every single dime in the Aegis gateway is currently locked. The funds cannot be routed, withdrawn, or transferred. You are completely paralyzed." Victoria frantically dialed her private wealth manager at Credit Suisse. She held the phone to her ear, her hands trembling so violently she dropped the device twice. Answer, "Answer," she muttered. When the call finally connected, the voice on the other end was panicked. "Ms. Blair, I don't know what's happening. The central node just rejected our API keys. We are locked out. Our liquidity monitors are showing a total freeze on your primary, secondary, and Cayman accounts. We can't move a single cent." Victoria let the phone slip from her fingers. It shattered on the marble floor. The heiress, whose net worth just an hour ago was estimated at $4 billion, was suddenly worth nothing. Her credit cards, her mortgages, the liquid cash she used to fuel her lavish lifestyle, all of it was sealed behind an impenetrable cryptographic wall. "This is illegal," Simon stammered, staring at his own useless phone. "You can't just freeze our money." "It's not your money anymore," Chloe corrected. "And you're right, I can't hold it forever. Which is why I set up a secondary routing protocol. Directive Icarus doesn't just freeze the assets." She pressed one final decisive button. The massive OLED screen shifted again. The red account frozen text began to blink rapidly, accompanied by a high-pitched rhythmic chime that sounded exactly like a ticking clock. "Executing Federal Reserve Fed wire transfer," the automated voice announced, ringing out like a death knell in the silent penthouse. "Destination, United States Department of Justice Asset Forfeiture Fund, Escrow. Secondary destination, Securities and Exchange Commission Whistleblower Recovery Node." Absolute pandemonium erupted. The composure of New York's financial elite shattered completely. The people in the room, individuals who routinely destroyed companies and ruined lives with the stroke of a pen, were suddenly reduced to panicked, cornered animals. Several guests began sprinting toward the private elevators, desperate to distance themselves from the catastrophic financial fallout about to rain down on Croft Capital. "No, no, no, no," Nathaniel wailed. It wasn't a shout of anger. It was a guttural sound of pure, unadulterated despair. He scrambled toward Chloe, no longer a titan of industry, but a broken man watching his empire burn to ashes in real time. "Please! Chloe, please! I'll give you anything! I'll give you back the company! I'll give you 50% of my personal equity! Just abort the transfer!" 50% of zero is still zero, Nathaniel, Chloe said, watching him beg with an expression of profound indifference. On the screen, the numbers began to drain. It was mesmerizing to watch. Billions of dollars, accumulated through ruthless exploitation and illegal market manipulation, were being digitally funneled directly into federal custody. The balance on Nathaniel's primary offshore account, once sitting at $2.4 billion, dropped to $1.2 billion, then $500 million, then zero. Simon Roth collapsed into a dining chair, staring blankly ahead. His hedge fund was built entirely on leveraged debt secured by the assets currently vanishing before his eyes. By tomorrow morning, when the markets opened and his margin calls came due, he wouldn't just be bankrupt. He would owe billions he didn't have. He would be criminally liable. "You've killed us," Victoria whispered, sinking to the floor, uncaring that the spilled wine was now soaking into her knees. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, tears streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup. "You've taken everything." "I took back what you stole," Chloe replied, her voice firm and uncompromising. "And I provided the DOJ with a fully decrypted, unalterable ledger of every illegal transaction you've made over the past 2 years, The tax evasion, the insider trading, the shell companies. The FBI Cybercrimes Division is receiving the packet as we speak. As if on cue, the wail of police sirens began to drift up from the streets of Manhattan, far below. At first it was faint, a distant hum over the sounds of the city, but the sound grew louder, multiplying as multiple federal vehicles converged on Central Park South. The security guards, realizing their paychecks were now non-existent and their employers were about to be indicted, quietly slipped out the back service exit, leaving the billionaires entirely defenseless. "You enjoyed humiliating me," Chloe said, looking down at Nathaniel, who was still kneeling on the floor, hyperventilating as the television screen displayed a final, glaring message. "Transfers complete. Total assets liquidated." "You thought because I was wearing an apron, because I was carrying your drinks, that I was beneath you," Chloe continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the elevator. "You thought wealth made you untouchable. You thought your encryption made you gods. But you forgot the golden rule of technology, Nathaniel." Nathaniel slowly looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. "A system is only as secure as its architect," Chloe said, "and you shouldn't have fired the architect." The private elevator doors chimed and slid open. Chloe stepped inside. She didn't look back at the room of ruined billionaires, the spilled wine, or the massive screen displaying their total financial destruction. She simply pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, Nathaniel Croft let out a final, agonizing scream, echoing against the marble walls of his $80 million tomb. Chloe watched the floor numbers tick down. Her pulse was steady. Her breathing was calm. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the simple, cheap hair tie she had used earlier, and pulled her dark hair back into a practical ponytail. She walked out of the opulent lobby of the residential tower, stepping out into the cool, crisp Manhattan night air. A fleet of black SUVs with flashing red and blue lights screeched to a halt in front of the building, federal agents pouring out and rushing past her into the lobby. Chloe simply adjusted her jacket, merged into the crowded sidewalk, and disappeared into the city. She was just a regular person on the street. Invisible, unnoticed, exactly the way she liked it. Did Chloe's ultimate revenge leave you speechless? There is nothing more satisfying than watching arrogant billionaires lose everything to the person they underestimated the most. If you loved this story of karma, high-tech justice, and an underdog completely destroying a corrupt empire, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a brilliant plot twist, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible, jaw-dropping, real-life dramas.